around about the age of 9 or 10, I started to put on weight as a young child, and I remember my mum and dad were a little bit concerned about the fact I was putting on weight, and they actually thought they'd take me to the family GP to just see if there was anything that they could do. And this was back in talking like early 70s now. I'm 57 now. And I remember, I'll never forget going to the doctor and him using a word that I'd never heard before to describe me, and he described me as being obese.
How old were you here?
About 45.
45. So you mentioned that it was a lifelong struggle for you with weight since you were very young. Feeling
that's great, and in the meantime the weight had continued to fall off. Like I lost a stone, 2 stone, 3 stone, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'd never ever been able to do this on any diet I'd been on. I suddenly thought I'd found the holy grail of diets. The blood pressure and the cholesterol, so that I came off the blood pressure medication in about 2015, which is 2016, about 4 or 5 years ago now. The doctor was happy to wean me off my medication, and I'd already come off the statins before that. He tested my blood pressure and asked me to self-test it at home because he knew about my white coat syndrome, and I tested it at home, and I remember feeling for a period of time I was feeling quite lightheaded, and I tested my blood pressure and it was ridiculously low, and I thought, oh gosh, I'm on medication for blood pressure and I've already lowered my blood pressure through my diet, and having lost the weight, really I probably need to come off this medication.
And welcome everyone to Afternoon Tea. I'm Dr. Linda, if we haven't met yet, emergency medicine physician from Sheffield. And I'm here with my lovely co-host, Dr. Erica, GP from the West Midlands. And we are both lifestyle medicine physicians.
Linda and I have both learned that, chronic diseases don't have to be the norm, and your genetics is not your destiny. And both of us use lifestyle medicine and nutrition in our daily clinical practice to help our patients combat chronic diseases. And Afternoon Tea with Docs was born out of our shared passion for lifestyle medicine and to empower everyone with the lifestyle and nutrition practices that we have learned over the years. And to share with you our experiences and also the knowledge of our expert speakers and inspirational people like Graham today, so that everyone can live a long and fulfilling life. And if you haven't met us before, you can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, watch the replays of our previous episodes on YouTube. And we are here for Afternoon Tea every Sunday at 5 o'clock. And at the end of the month, the last Sunday of every month, we have an inspirational story to share with us. And today we have Graham Henry with us. Welcome, Graham.
Well, hello, pleased to be here.
Hello, hi Graham. You have an incredible story to tell us, and you portray the lifestyle message so wonderfully. Just a little bit of background of Graham. He has done what I think nowadays is thought as something that's unachievable almost. He's went off of his cholesterol medications and his high blood pressure medications, as well as he lost 7 stone through lifestyle changes, and that's what we are going to talk about today. So I would love to invite you, Graham, to tell us a little bit about your story and how did it all start for you?
Well, around about the age of 9 or 10, I started to put on weight as a young child, and I remember my mum and dad were a little bit concerned about the fact I was putting on weight, and they actually thought they'd take me to the family GP to just, you know, see if there was anything that they could do. And this was back in, talking like early 70s now, because I'm 57 now. And I remember, I'll never forget going to the doctor and him using a word that I'd never heard before to describe me. And he described me as being obese. It didn't sound very nice. I didn't really know what it meant. I just thought it just meant, you know, I was slightly overweight, which obviously I was. And it was something that really, in terms of my family, that they didn't really know how to approach that. It was, you know, there's not a great deal of knowledge about how to do it. I guess it was just, well, you need to eat less. And I remember starting some kind of diet, which was basically just not eating much. And I remember after a few days, I felt I was seeing spots before my eyes, and I'd said to my mum that I wasn't feeling well, and she said, right, she said, you're not doing this anymore. It's silly. It's silly. It's, you know, we're just going to have to see how things go. And I carried on with my life. And I remember going to secondary school, and I was always the one that was kind of about the last but one to be picked to play football and things like that. And of course, that's not very nice for a young child, because you start to get a bit of a complex. And I remember also, and I think I spoke to you about it when we first chatted a week ago. In those days, that if the weather was bad and we were doing our PE session, we'd go into the gym, and it was an all boys school as well, and we'd go into the gym and we'd play five-a-side football. And in order to differentiate between the two sides, one side played in their gym t-shirt, and the other side had to take their shirts off and play in what they called skins. And I always seemed to end up on the side that played in skins. And here I was, this boy who just had a big tummy and, you know, kind of like wobbly fat and everything. And I felt really self-conscious about it. And I hated it, even though I loved playing the football. I actually hated it. And I used to think, oh God, no, there can be nothing worse. But there was the cross country, and the cross country run, which was again running 2 miles, 3 miles through fields back to the school gates, to be looked at by an inquiring public. And again, I was always the one that was desperate not to finish last. And I actually pride myself on the fact I never did finish last. I always finished second last. So I wasn't particularly fit because of just carrying the extra weight. So I think all through my teens, really, I was kind of like, you know, the plump schoolboy and everything. And then when I went off to university, and I guess it kind of faded into the background a little bit more, because the life at university was great and fun. And like most students, I kind of got involved in probably drinking a little bit too much. And but I didn't feel with the weight it was a problem. I was always felt relatively healthy with it. I've always kind of like, you know, done a fair bit of exercise, and I like to play sport. But I didn't think it was doing me particularly any harm. And it was always thinking that, oh, I'll deal with this when I'm a bit older. You know, it's not a problem now. And then when I finished university, I eventually got into a job in publishing, and it involved a lot of traveling overseas. And I'd go off for maybe 2-3 weeks at a time, travel around Scandinavia, Germany, etc. Fantastic job, you know, who wouldn't want to do that? All fully paid. Absolutely loved it. But inevitably, you're staying in a hotel, you're eating 3 times a day, all the food's free. So you eat your breakfast before you start work and get everything that you want from the buffet. You have your lunch, and again, you know, you're pretty hungry because you've been out on the road visiting clients, etc. And then in the evening, you'd reward yourself for a really good day by going into the hotel and ordering a 3-course meal, washed down with a couple of beers or half a bottle of wine. And that really was my life for quite a long time. I was really working in that kind of lifestyle for the next 20 years. So you can imagine that gradually over time, my weight just began to increase steadily, to the point where I was probably was probably getting up to about 15, 16 stone at that time in my late 20s, early 30s. I was then seconded out to work in Amsterdam to set up a sales office in Amsterdam by the publisher I was working for back in 1993. And a lot of pressure. It was doing it all on my own. It was I didn't really have a support network there, other than friends that I made while I was there. And I remember feeling quite anxious about it. And I was beginning to get like symptoms of feeling kind of a little bit dizzy, having kind of like panic attacks, etc. And I put it down to the pressure of the work. So I went to the doctor, and the doctor tested my blood pressure. And I think the first time I went there, he said, I'm just going to have to do this again. There must be a mistake. I think my blood pressure, as I remember, at that particular time, it was something like 180 over 110 or 120, which is incredibly high. I do hasten to add that I have this white coat syndrome, so that whenever my blood pressure is tested, I always feel the worst, and of course it shoots up. So there was maybe a small element of that, and I remember the doctor trying it again and testing it again, and it did go down a little bit more, but kind of my resting blood pressure was probably during the was probably somewhere like 140 over 95, which again is classed as being hypertensive. And I realized that the weight was obviously beginning to be a problem. I was also drinking too much in those days, in terms of, I mean, not heavily, but just regularly. And I also smoked as well, which, so again, my God, all of the kind of risk factors coming together for potential, cardiovascular disease later on, or probably already developing it anyway then. My cholesterol was measured at around, I think it was 5.4. So in those days, that was considered to be, okay, kind of on the borderline. I mean, we know now, or we're recommended now, ideally it should be 4 or under. I think in the way that they measure it in other countries, I guess that would, my cholesterol was probably around about 200 or so. And again, I think that's considered, too high now. So going back to the doctor in Holland, he put me on beta blockers for the anxiety and for the blood pressure. And I continued taking that medication for a number of years. Kind of got it under control, but I was kind of still continuing the lifestyle I was, but taking blood pressure medication. Wasn't taking statins yet in those days. It was not deemed necessary for me. I then got posted to another role at the end of about 1999, 2000. I went to be based in Stockholm for a year, and I didn't know anyone other than the people I was working with. So again, no real I guess I lived for my work, and I went to the office, got back home, had a drink, etc. And that was a bit of a pattern. So again, the weight was it was creeping up, and eventually I went back to the UK back in the early 2000s, and I think I was clocking up around about 18 stone in the early 2000s. That was probably around the heaviest that I got to. Again, continued to take the blood pressure medication. Eventually, I came off beta blockers, and I was put onto ACE inhibitors, which obviously have a different action. And I continued on that medication for about the next 10 years, up to about 2015. I started taking statins in about 2013, I think it was, 2012, for the cholesterol. But I remember not feeling great on them. I was feeling kind of a little bit of weakness, and I knew that there was issues with potential side effects. And I said to the doctor, I want to come off these. And the doctor grudgingly took me off them. And I said, I'm going to do this through diet. So I tried various diets. I mean, I tried diets really all through the period I've talked about, but I tried the Atkins diet, and it worked well for about 3 weeks. And so I became completely constipated and decided that one wasn't for me. I lost a bit of weight, but of course I put it back on again. And that was really the pattern that I've always had, that I'd lose weight, going on some kind of like short-term diet that was never sustainable because it was boring. It wasn't nice. And I thought, it's not sustainable.
This is Graham. How old were you here?
That was in around 2009, I think. 2008, 2009. So I would have been about 45.
45. So you mentioned that it was a lifelong struggle for you with weight since you were very young. And here you had another photo on your website. How old were you here?
That was in, I think, 2005. That was, it was when I was living down in Hertfordshire after coming back from Stockholm. That was, I think I was at my heaviest there. As you can see from my face and shoulders, it's incredible now that how big I was, and I kind of like, at the time, I don't think I really realized, and it was quite, I wouldn't say it's upsetting to see myself like that, but it's surprising that I kind of like lost sight really of how big I got.
As you mentioned in your story, you had so much going on, the job, the traveling, and not having anyone to confide in about your struggles at the time. Your message is so powerful to say that even if you lived like that for such a long time and you had a difficulty with your weight from a young age, that still in your 50s, you can make a difference. You can shift onto this new way of living that is fulfilling and sustainable and healthy. I think that's such a powerful message.
Yeah, I guess I should explain how I did that.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that all of that time that I've talked about is I was single most of my adult life. Never had a long-term relationship, and I think it all fed into my lack of confidence in the way I looked, and that's pretty sad, really, when I think back now that it did have that impact on my confidence and my self-worth. And I was married to my job, my career, and that's clear now that's where I got my satisfaction, and I suppose that was concealing how I felt. I've never been a depressive type of person. I've always been fairly cheerful, and people who know me well, I've always been pretty upbeat. But underneath that veneer, there's always been that sense of missing something. So 2009 was a bit of a pivotal year for me, because I reconnected with an old university friend, Annette, who I'd met as a student in Germany. I spent a year out abroad as part of my German degree back in 1983-84, and Annette was at the same university that I was studying at, and we got on really well. I mean, there was never any kind of any relationship there other than just really good friends, but something had obviously something was because of that connection. And it's pretty amazing. 26 years later, I've after having been in contact with her once or twice in the meantime, through letters and postcards, just to share our stories, or what are we up to. 26 years later, we agreed to meet up in York, which is where I was living at the time. She was based in Cumbria. She came over to see me, and we had a really nice weekend, and we kind of hit it off and thought, yeah, that was nice. And I remember her going home, and I said, well, maybe we won't leave it so long next time before we meet up again. Little did I know that she was really downbeat about that, because she actually really liked me, and she was convinced that something might happen. And it's quite ironic that she met with a pupil of hers because she was a teacher. She bumped into a pupil of hers on the train going back to Cumbria. And she was saying, oh, where have you been? She said, oh, I've been to York. She said, oh, really? What were you doing there? And Annette said something to her like, I've just been to stay with the man I'm going to marry. Oh. I didn't know this. I didn't know this until she told me later. Anyway, she'd managed to hook me somehow, and we got into regular kind of conversations by email, etc. We called each other, and eventually we started traveling across the country every other weekend or every weekend. You know, first me to her and then her to me, for a good few months, and eventually got engaged and got married. And one of the things that was really interesting is that Annette had already ventured into the area of healthy eating, and her story will be told in next month. And she'd managed to do a lot of research into the kind of things that she would need to do to resolve her issue. And when I'd go and visit her, she'd prepare a meal, and I'd sit down and eat with her and think, gosh, this is a bit different. And it was none of the things that I was kind of like used to eating, you know, like meat and 2 veg, etc. What she was eating was very much plant-based, and lots of salad and much smaller portions than I was used to. And because I'm pretty flexible and easygoing as a person, and not fussy, I've never have been a fussy eater. That's probably one of my problems. I just ate what Annette was eating, and I found I actually quite liked it. And I thought, you know, I'm sure this will probably do me good. And when we'd finished our period of, using an old-fashioned word, courting, we got married, and I continued to just really eat kind of the way that Annette was eating, and that was very much, again, focusing on plant-based food. At the time, she made some concessions for me very kindly. She agreed to that. Okay, I wanted to have chicken, for example. I wanted to eat eggs, and I was still eating dairy, but much less of it. And it was mostly the plant-based food that we were focusing on. And incredibly, I noticed that my weight was starting to drop. And I thought, this is strange, because actually I'm not dieting. I'm not counting calories. I'm eating and I'm feeling satisfied after what I eat. I'm not feeling hungry. I'm not feeling I'm doing something that's really miserable. I'm actually eating really nice food. And my weight was actually starting to fall off. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. So we continued to eat that way, and I remember having some digestive issues, and I went to have a food intolerance test, and I was diagnosed as having a food intolerance to cow's milk, egg yolks, yeast, and red Merlot grapes. I was most worried about the red Merlot grapes because it meant, oh, red wine. But I decided, and I'm quite surprised at how I managed this, but overnight I stopped having dairy, cheese, eggs, completely eliminated them from my diet. And that was back in probably about 2012, I think, 2013. And I found it actually quite easy. And I know that those foods are incredibly difficult to give up for many people. For some reason, I was able to do it because there was always alternatives. And Annette is dairy intolerant, so she'd already worked out what to do to have something as an alternative. She actually, in support of me, gave up eating eggs as well. So she made a sacrifice, which she's very happy to have done now because we're both completely plant-based. But so therefore I eliminated virtually all animal foods from my diet. The last thing to go was fish, which we convinced ourselves we needed to be able to get omega-3, and therefore we were regularly eating salmon, mackerel, sardines, and feeling, feeling that's great. And in the meantime, the weight had continued to fall off. Like I lost a stone, 2 stone, 3 stone. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'd never, ever been able to do this on any diet I've been on. I suddenly thought I've found the holy grail of diets. Eat whatever you like within a certain type of food, and the rest will follow. And it did. And then I hit a plateau, and I think I was about 14 stone, 14 and a half stone. And I thought, what am I going to do to be able to lose this additional weight? And I remember getting something like tonsillitis in January one year, and it completely took my appetite away for about a week, and it was painful eating. I got on the scales, and I lost another half a stone. And I thought, great, that started it again. It seemed to kind of like act as the kind of like the prompt, the catalyst for losing more weight. And again, just continued to lose weight over the last few years. Eliminated fish from our diets in, I guess probably around three years ago now, when we saw so much on the TV about the plastics in the oceans, and felt really uncomfortable about eating fish because what was in them, what might be in them from the plastics. I mean, now we're very much into the kind of animal welfare thing, so we wouldn't eat it for that reason now. But at the time, it was more about what were we going to get in it. And
how old were you when you started this process with Annette?
So we got married in 2011, and I would have been 46.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when that's really when the journey started in terms of my weight loss. So when I was 46, by that time you kind of think that's it. I'm never going to lose weight now. I've tried so many things. I'm 46. Unless I do something pretty drastic, nothing's going to happen. And I remember thinking people are going to have these gastric bypasses and things, and thought, no, that's not for me. I want to do something more organically, more natural, and I just wish I knew how to do it. And so I never really found the secret myself. I've actually found it through chance, just by adopting a different type of diet that actually I really enjoyed eating, but I would never have found that way myself without that reason to do it, with Annette being there. So she really was the key transformative influence on my weight loss, and I'll always be grateful for that. And I mean, I'm now 11 stone, which is 7 stone less than the 18 stone I mentioned earlier, and I've managed to actually maintain that weight for the last 2 or 3 years without deviating more than a few pounds. And I find it extremely easy to do now, because I know exactly what to eat, and I know that there are dangers in certain things. Like if I start eating too much dried fruit and too many nuts, I know that then I'll maybe put on a couple of pounds or something. So I'll then just cut that out again. And we went through a raw food stage, as I mentioned, and we incorporate raw food with everything we eat. We feel raw food is to eat it in its raw state is great. There's a lot of kind of benefits for it, but we also love certain food cooked, and we tend to steam a lot of vegetables, and we'll often have a meal which combines the two. So we'll have maybe I'll cut up a raw pepper, and we'll have raw celery, maybe raw spring onion, but then we'll maybe steam some cauliflower and steam some kale and a sweet potato, and we'll add that to it and mix it all together with a really nice dressing. But when we were going through this raw food stage initially, we were a little bit more purist, and we were tending to have probably 80% raw, and we were doing what people tend to term as gourmet raw, and that's the kind of thing that you see a lot of the cookery books out there for raw food, and cookery books for raw food. It sounds like an oxymoron, but I think you see where I'm going. We realized the gourmet food, it was extremely attractive as a food to eat, because it was very tasty, but it's also, there's a lot of fat, a lot of oils, a lot of sweeteners that are used, more healthy sweeteners, and supposedly healthier fats. And but it's very calorific, and we were kidding ourselves that we were doing the right thing with it, but we realized actually we were eating far too much fat, and particularly coconut oil, which I was convinced was really, really healthy fat. And, you know, I was eating it saying, I can eat coconut oil, it's got no cholesterol in it, it's great. And I realized actually I was eating far too much. And through what we've learned through research and having really done a deep dive into the research and being educated, we realized that we were having too much fat. And now we don't use any oils at all in our cooking. We just use hemp seeds and linseed and chia seed for our fats, and it's, for us, it's really sustainable. We love eating this way, and it's we feel it's worked for me. But I had to go through that period of evolution to actually get to where I am now, and I think that's one of the lessons that I think I've learned, that never think that you're completely there at the end. I think we're always constantly learning, constantly evolving, and you've got to find what works best for you as well. And I think I've arrived at a place now which is ideal. And the blood pressure and the cholesterol, so that I came off the blood pressure medication in about 2015, which is 2016, about 4 or 5 years ago now. The doctor was happy to wean me off my medication, and I'd already come off the statins before that. He tested my blood pressure and asked me to self-test it at home because he knew about my white coat syndrome. And I tested it at home, and I remember feeling for a period of time I was feeling quite lightheaded, and I tested my blood pressure and it was ridiculously low. And I thought, oh gosh, you know, I'm on medication for blood pressure and I've already lowered my blood pressure through my diet, and having lost the weight, really, I probably need to come off this medication. So I went to the doctor and he was happy to take me off, and I've never been on it again since. And
that's incredible. So how long did it take from changing the diet for you to come off of your hypertension medications?
Overall, I think it was probably about 4 years. Mm-hmm. But my weight loss was very gradual as well. It wasn't like, you know, lose 2 stone in a year. It was kind of like half a stone. Some years were more than others. So it was a gradual, it wasn't like a crash diet. It was a more organic weight loss. It was a whole kind of change to a different way of being, I suppose.
When you think about the medications, when we put patients on medications, we suppose that they will be on that medications for life. And you came off of them in 4 years is incredible. For the emergency situation right now, your blood pressure is really high, so we have to give you the medication, and it's a brilliant drug to optimize your health at the time, but with the plan that here is a good diet and a lifestyle that actually going to get you off of these meds within a year or so. So well done for doing that.
Yeah, thank you.
And Graham, I think when we were chatting before, you were telling us that your blood pressure went from 140/95 to, when you were feeling dizzy, and you checked your blood pressure and it was something like 95/60. So there was a significant drop.
Yeah. I thought, I remember it being, I was a little bit scared actually, because I thought, gosh, that's too low. I can't remember exactly what it was, and I thought, gosh, you know, surely I can't be going to the other end of the scale. And I thought I'd better get the blood pressure machine, or what do you call it?
Recalibrated, you said.
Yeah, recalibrated. In other words, take it to the doctors and let him check my blood pressure, then check my blood pressure straight after with my own to see what the difference was. And there was a little bit of play in it. There was about a 5, I think it was 5 or 10 points different, but it was more or less there. So I thought, gosh, so these measures I'm taking are relatively accurate. It also, I suppose, it depends on what time of the day, and but I thought, no, I really need to come off this medication, because I thought I'm actually taking something that's artificially lowering my blood pressure when I've actually managed to resolve my blood pressure, my hypertension through a natural way. I thought that it's pointless, like competing with the two, and I was absolutely delighted to come off it, because I always felt that somehow I felt it was a sign of weakness that I'd failed somehow by having to go on medication, kind of like beat myself up. How could I let myself get to the point where I need to take medication for this? And I remember going to the doctor through, like, when I only just started my weight loss journey, and remember saying to the doctor when I went to have my blood pressure checked, I told him what I was doing, and I got a very kind of smug response, head slightly cocked to one side, and saying, well, you're on a honeymoon period, you probably won't keep it up. And to me, that was absolute pouring oil on the fire, because it made me want to really prove I could do it. And I then I had a much more enlightened GP, the one that took me off the blood pressure medication, who was really supportive, thought, I'd done really well, and was delighted. And to me, that's why I think the lifestyle medicine approach I'm so passionate about, and what you guys do, to actually help to support patients in a more natural way is for me is the way that I would want to go.
And you mentioned about statins, and when you told your doctor that you didn't want to be on the statins anymore because it was causing you some aches and tiredness and things like that, what did he say to you? I think you said you mentioned something to us about what he said.
I can't remember now what I said to you when we spoke. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I think you said, she said, you won't ever do it, but give it a try.
That's it. Yes. Yeah. She thought that I wouldn't be able to reduce my cholesterol. She said that, there's the evidence shows that you can only reduce your cholesterol by a certain amount through diet, and most of it's genetic or, whatever. And I thought, no, I can't believe that. I don't think that we are flawed as a living organism. I'm sure that our body has the ability to be able to come back to what the homeostasis, whatever it is, if we live our life in such a way that enables it to do that. And I think that to medicalize people unnecessarily when there is a way to do it I'm a great believer in that.
Well, and as we said earlier at the start, chronic disease, they're not the norm, and unfortunately we have kind of started to see it as the norm. And as Linda mentioned earlier, when people are put on medications, it's kind of expected that they would be on it lifelong, but that shouldn't be the norm, because we can go back to the root cause and look at what is actually causing the problem and fix it that way, rather than just giving medications that helps with the symptom but doesn't really deal with the underlying cause, which for a lot of diseases is inflammation of the body. And this inflammation doesn't just contribute to the problem that you have right now, for example, high blood pressure, but it also contributes to problems with other other systems, including heart disease, liver problem, fatty liver. It can lead to kidney disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, numerous gut problems, autoimmune diseases, and diabetes. And inflammation is the driver for all of these is the common driver for all of these conditions. And genetics, as we said earlier, is not your destiny. And you may have heard about epigenetics, that our genes can actually be turned on and off through our lifestyle. And these things that we do matter. Things like you mentioned earlier, smoking, drinking, exercising. And actually you haven't mentioned today yet, but when we talked before, you talked about when you and Annette started courting, you went on long walks together quite often, and actually got you moving. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've always been I was never a couch potato as such. I was, you know, did a reasonable amount of it. So I used to go to the gym a couple of times a week, and I used to think, great, this is great because I'll lose weight going to the gym. Of course, I didn't really lose the weight. I was probably keeping my general fitness, you know, pretty much up there. But now, I mean, Annette is like all of her family, is extremely active, goes on lots of walks, gets very restless if she's after half an hour of sitting, and therefore again, because I wanted to be with her, we used to, and still do, and more than ever now, we walk everywhere. I got rid of my car 4 years ago. I'm now living in Berlin. We moved to Berlin in October last year, and we walk everywhere. We walk about 35 miles a week, 30 to 35 miles a week, about 4 to 5 miles a day without fail. And to me, again, that's fantastic, because to actually feel, to be able to do that and feel the benefits is so important. So it's, to me, it's not just the one thing, it's everything together that's worked.
And that's why I love your story so much, and that's why it's so inspiring, because it pulls in all the different pillars of lifestyle medicine that we talk about, including nutrition, physical activity, your sort of stress management, your job, relationships, and alcohol, smoking, just your general lifestyle. Everything is pulled together in your story with Annette. And actually, you know, being in that relationship has been the sort of the thing that sparked all these changes. And in answer to what your doctor said, when you said you wanted to stop statin, and they said that, you know, only a certain number of people, it only lowers your cholesterol by a certain amount. The portfolio diet has actually been shown to be as effective as statins in lowering your cholesterol level. And the portfolio diet was simple. It was increasing fiber, increasing plant foods, increasing soy protein, and having some almonds. And it is doable. And through this diet, people have been able to lower their cholesterol as much as if they've been on statins. So yeah.
It's a super powerful study, and you really embody that, Graham, in such a wonderful way. So all the research that we have right now completely backs, what you're doing, which is a whole food, plant-based diet, moving, finding meaning in your relationship. And if people do want to make a difference and they feel like they're in a rut, unfortunately, sometimes we have to make big changes in our lives if we want to get out. And when we do these changes that you described, they can actually be so enjoyable and so sustainable. As you showed, your life just was filled with color and beauty through this relationship, and literally through the food that you're eating that is not any longer beige and brown, but actually colorful, vibrant, with so much taste. So do tell us, what do you eat, Graham?
Right. Well, now it's pretty much every morning we will have a big bowl of fruit, chopped up fruit. So like berries, which we at the moment we're getting frozen berries, and apple, orange, banana, kiwi. Just a like just really nice big bowl, and then we usually have a dish of porridge. Just oats made with water, and that's it. Maybe a couple of dried figs, which is probably one of our one addictions. Absolutely love figs, and that's really a typical breakfast. And so no, we don't eat bread at all, or very, very rarely. And then lunch would be, we tend to steam. I mentioned we steam a lot of vegetables, and so a typical lunch would be like steaming some broccoli or cauliflower, carrots, sweet potato, and then maybe having a little bit of raw with that as well. So we'd have maybe a chop of a red pepper, celery, maybe add some frozen peas to the steamed vegetables as well, some mushroom, and then Annette is a real whiz with dressings, because obviously we feel it's really important to bring a meal alive. And so if you have a really good dressing that's got, if you're into a little bit of spiciness, for example, we love to add a little bit of cayenne or maybe ginger, depending on what the dressing is. We also use miso paste, which is a great source of salt. So we don't add salt to any of our food. We just use things like miso to add a bit of salt to the meal, and it gives it a great umami type taste as well to the dressing. And then we'll mix that up with everything that we've prepared, and then we'll maybe have a banana and a yogurt or something for as a dessert. Something that Annette particularly does particularly regularly at the moment. And again, she's the blender queen. I mean, she does everything that involves grinding, blending, whatever. That's her. She loves it. I can't get her anywhere near that. So one of the things that she does, she'll make like a milk made out of hemp seeds and chia seeds and water. So kind of hemp chia milk, and we will have that with, she will mix some carob powder, if you know what that is, which is really, really nice, kind of like a chocolate-like bean, and just a bit of almost like a chocolatey flavor, and mix that into a kind of like, mix that all together to make like a chocolatey or a caroby type milk. And we'll maybe have that with a banana or something. So that would be a typical day for us, and then a typical lunch for us. And then at our evening meal, we like to eat lighter in the evening, because neither of us particularly good with eating a big meal in the evening. So we'll generally have a big leafy salad, like lots of leafage of different types, with maybe some fruit chopped up in the salad, and again one of the dressings, and that's it. And the beauty of eating all of the plant-based foods that we have as well is that we don't worry about the portion sizes. All that leafage and everything just in there is so calorie low. It's low calorie density, that it's full of water and it's full of fiber, which fills you up, but you're not getting calories, which is great. So you can actually quite happily eat a huge bowl of salad and know that it's not going to do you any harm. Well, that's quite interesting. Something's just jumped on the screen.
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd just share this as
I didn't even know that.
About the portion size. About, you can eat a lot of fruit and veg, and it will fill your stomach up, and you can eat a lot of it without all the calories. So 500 calories looks like this if you divide it into the different kind of food groups, like oil, cheese, meat, and potatoes, beans, rice, and then fruit and veg. So as you mentioned earlier in your talk, the previous different diets didn't work because it was quite restrictive. And when you come from a place of deprivation, it is quite hard to stick to a diet. Whereas with what you're eating now, you're able to eat a lot of it, and there isn't that deprivation mindset that you need to restrict your portion size or anything like that.
Absolutely. What I would say though as well is that, again, I mentioned it, we've gone through a period of evolution, and I think had we started from scratch to eat what we eat now, I think it would have been a lot more difficult to do it overnight. And I think this is where a lot of people feel that they've got to do everything, it's all or nothing. And I think it's something that's like gradual changes to this, and you've got to allow your taste buds to change as well, and they do. research has shown that it can take anything from 30 days to 90 days to change habits and change your tastes. But also there's a huge amount of research going on into the microbiome, in our gut, and sometimes the gut bacteria we have is actually telling us what it wants to eat, and therefore to change from one type of food to another overnight it can actually create problems. It can create some digestive problems as well. So for us now, we've arrived at that at the other side, and I think that we've adapted in a way that we can eat that. And I think that for us, it's exactly right, and we love it. We've arrived at where we want to be now. But I think small changes sometimes are going to be necessary for some people, and that's why we would never say you've got to change from here to there in one fell swoop, because people won't be able to do that. They won't want to do that.
And rather than eating one thing, what is the Western diet? It's a pale, brown, meat-dominated, white, milk-dominated, again, cheese-dominated, which is all very pale. So you can think like, oh gosh, I must be missing something if I'm just eating the same thing every single day. So we would love to invite you to start experimenting with food and bringing in a lot of grains. And I can stress grains more because we have quite a lot of studies. If there's one thing to focus on that's missing right now in the Western diet particularly is beans and lentils. Grams, 15 grams. You're completely right. Maximum is about 15 grams on a Western diet, exactly. And even that fiber is not a soluble fiber, the one that comes from grains and beans that are superior to kind of processed foods. Do it gradually, slowly, because it can give you cramp and quite a bit of gas, but it's worth it. It's a good cause. So do it gradually.
Stops. It doesn't last forever. the cramping and the increased gas, as your microbes change in your gut, those symptoms will also subside. So.
And on Graham's community website, henryandhenryeu.com, they will actually suggest some ways of how you can increase your fiber intake. Graham, how could you incorporate dark green diets into your daily life?
That's a really good question, because I know that not everybody is comfortable about eating lots of dark greens. I mean, I mentioned already that we tend to steam them, but also making a smoothie, for example, can be a really nice way to get a little bit more into your diet. And we find that, so we tend to like things like kale or spinach in a smoothie, or surprisingly even romaine lettuce. And that was something that we experimented with when we realized that one day we hadn't got anything in, and we were only able to find romaine lettuce, and we thought the smoothie would end up tasting just lettucey, but it was fantastic, and I can really recommend it. But the secret is to also use fruits, to particularly if you're using kale, because kale's got quite a strong taste. So it's good to use fruit like bananas in your smoothie, maybe apple, and any other fruits that you want, and then add some lettuce as well. Some leafy greens as well, and you're getting all the benefit without necessarily getting the, what to some people might be the kind of like slightly unpleasant taste until you get used to it. So that's one way. Salads, clearly, great way to have leafy greens. Again, romaine lettuce, really, really good lettuce to use, because it's got very good values for things like omega-3, surprisingly, in terms of a plant-based form, and calcium and iron as well. And spinach, great for a lot of different nutrients, although bear in mind that because it's high in something called oxalic acid, it's going to prevent you from absorbing some of the iron and calcium, so it's not necessarily the best source for those minerals. It is easy if you cook it, though. If you steam it, you're going to get a little bit more of your minerals absorbed. But kale, really, really good vegetable to get minerals, and broccoli as well.
To find some inspirations and to venture away from the usual diets that we have right now. to add all these wonderful things that Graham has encouraged us to do so. And we can see that it's worth it, because look at you, your story is incredible. You have done all that we said to you from a medical community that you can do. So congratulations for proving us wrong. And it's so nice to hear that you did so. And we have loads to learn from you and your story, and much, much more. I mean, I can't wait to come on your community, which is a completely free space for now, where we can learn how to cook the way that you eat and get inspired with recipes. I definitely have to and would love to learn how to make the dressings that make food so much more delicious. That's something that I've been trying to learn now. And knowing that Annette is so good at that. Great way to learn through your lovely community.
It was so interesting when you said, Graham, earlier that you managed to lose your 7 stones without being on a diet. You said no diet, and that is so interesting, because it's just become part of your lifestyle. And it's not, when we talk about diet, people think of it as hard work and not pleasurable, but you've enjoyed your journey.
Absolutely. It was a way of eating rather than a diet, because I didn't ever feel I was restricting myself. I just moved from one way of eating to another that was equally, well, now I think loads better. And so yeah, it's the best diet ever for me. And I realize everyone's different, and it's not necessarily going to be what works for every single person. But I think in terms of if you go natural and whole foods, I think that it's going to thank you. It's going to reward you, and that's the key, really. Incorporate as many natural whole foods in your diet as possible, and preferably from plants.
How long did it take for you to get used to the flavors and stop craving sugars and processed trans fats that are available in processed foods nowadays?
I personally didn't really have that much of a problem with the transition in terms of that. I think the things that I did miss the most were cheese. I always loved cheese. I think every single day I would have eaten cheese, and I guess I was addicted to it. And I think there is it's quite common. There's something within cheese which is highly addictive. I think it's morphines or something. It's like a morphine-like substance.
It's an opiate, actually. It's addictive.
Yeah. And I think everybody you talk to, when you mention about perhaps giving up dairy, the one thing people always say is, oh, but I can't give up my cheese. And we put an ownership on it, my cheese. And that's it, because it is such a powerful thing in a lot of lives. I mean, I was walking around in Berlin yesterday at a street market, and they had all these beautiful cheeses. And I said to Annette, as we're walking down there, I said, my God, those look really nice. I can almost sense my, saliva beginning to salivate. And I said, isn't that strange? Because there's no way I would want to eat that, but it's still got that powerful hold on me. So there are certain things that you do miss. I also was missing. I love crunchy food, and I was missing things like potato crisps, for example, something like that. And even now, sometimes I need something to crunch, so I will maybe have nuts, a small amount of nuts instead, or maybe get some raw crackers, or just something that I can really, really crunch on. So yeah, I think it's tastes and textures can be a big problem for people as they're transitioning. I think we all have things that we need to replace, and it takes a while, but it does work eventually.
I think I shared this last week as well, that my husband was a big fan of cheese sandwich. Like, he loved cheese sandwich as a child, and sometimes he still ate it up until recently. And the other day I wasn't home, and he was like, oh, he didn't know what to eat, and he had a cheese sandwich, and we hadn't had cheese for a long time, and he was like, I really didn't enjoy it. Whereas he used to love it. So your taste buds do change, and it takes time. And for us, giving cheese up was the hardest thing for us as well. And I think for a lot of people that is the problem, as you said, because it's so addictive.
I think going back to the crisps as well that I was mentioning, I mean, that those are the kind of foods, of course, that have got us into a lot of trouble within society because of the salt and the fat, and it's those things that it's not just the crunch. I mean, the crunch is an extra thing as well, but the salt and the fat is so addictive, and unfortunately, those are the foods that really are causing a lot of the problems. And the manufacturers know exactly what they're doing when they're producing those, and it's just they know what will turn on the dopamine rush or whatever, and that's the hardest thing to give up. But you can look to something else to replace that that is much healthier, but it's just, it takes a while.
Unfortunately, I cannot transfer the images that I see every day in the emergency care. Unfortunately, we see the outcome of these tastes that are addictive in our work, and they are translated into tragic moments when we cannot reverse that problem any longer, when people are having heart attacks, strokes, when we diagnose them with dementia, with dissections. These are the moments which I would love to translate into this positive way of communicating about it. But I do appreciate that a lot of people don't see what we see as doctors every single day. And we are reminded of the outcomes of these addictive tastes, these salt, fat, trans fats that are present in processed foods and a lot of these dairies and cheeses and meats. They are very addictive, but what's even better than this taste is health. Believe me, whenever I tell my friends and family and my patients, please just try to look at your diet from a compassionate way to yourself, to see how you could protect yourself and your family from those things that I see every single day. We don't want to live with chronic diseases that cripple us for the last 30 years of our lives, with diabetes, high blood pressure, hypertension, strokes. So you have done and you have protected yourself and Annette from so much suffering by taking control and ownership of your own health. And our job is to educate our patients that they can do it and how to do it in an easy way. And I think certainly you have shown that in your story, and we are really grateful for that, truly.
And Graham, actually, I don't think we have touched on this. You've talked about how you've changed, and Janet just raised an important point that actually a lot of people, don't want to change. And what motivated you to make those changes?
I think for me, I always did want to change, but I didn't know how to do it. If I could have found the secret to doing it, I would have done it. And I was going down the wrong route. Unfortunately, we live in a society where we want fixes that, quick fixes often. So it's the latest diet trend. I think I mentioned I did the Atkins Diet, and it really didn't work for me, other than temporarily. And we've got loads of diets out there that, we see them on the TV comparing this diet against that diet so that someone can, fit into their clothes because they're getting married next month or whatever. And I think that those are just quick weight loss diets just to achieve, for a particular goal. But if it's a lifelong change, I didn't know how to do it until I happened on The Secret largely through Annette. If I hadn't met Annette, I don't know where I would have got to be honest. I don't know whether I would have managed to find The Secret for myself. So she was really pivotal for me in being able to lose the weight. But I can understand with a lot of people, they don't know where to go, they don't know what to do, and they don't often have the will to do it because they don't want to give up what they're tied to. I worked for 5 years in Holland and Barrett, and I was advising people constantly over that time that came into the store wanting to lose weight, and they inevitably asked, they wanted to go to the supplement section where they had the carb blockers or fat reduction supplements, etc. And I was probably the worst possible salesperson for Holland Barrett in that respect, because I said, I'm sorry, but I can't recommend those for you. What I can recommend, if you walk back up there, is we've got a food section, and I would go and I would explain to them what to eat that would help them in that journey. Inevitably, their eyes glazed over and they said, right, okay, well, thanks, it was nice to meet you, and they'd walk out. And I realized then that you can give people the information, but they've got to have the will to do it. And most people want to have that quick result. So it is a really, really difficult thing just to do it like that. You've got to have the support and the knowledge as to really how your body works to a degree, or about nutrition, to actually understand what's going to be best for you. I mean, one of the latest fads at the moment is the keto diet, and it has been shown to be effective maybe for losing weight in the short term, and for managing blood sugar, but it only really masks the underlying issues, and it can cause potentially more problems because of the amount of fat and cholesterol that you're eating. And therefore, for me, those aren't really viable for the long term. There may be just short-term actions that might work for a particular goal. If you want to have lifelong, maintain your weight and lifelong weight loss, maintain a healthy weight, I think you've got to look at changing the whole lifestyle. And it doesn't happen overnight necessarily.
Mm. About knowing your why do you want to change, and dig a little deeper, not just on a superficial level, but when you go deeper and understand actually the real reason for wanting to change, then you will be a lot more motivated to follow through with these changes. And it takes time. Nobody says weight loss is easy, and because it isn't, because of, that there are lots of temptations around, and sometimes when we make changes, we might not have people around us who support us, and in your case, your doctors didn't support you in making those changes. And sometimes, it's healthcare professionals, sometimes it's family members who don't support, and it can make changes really difficult. So really, truly understanding why you want to change, and actually having a support network, finding people who can support you through that journey, having somebody to keep you accountable. These are all really important things in changing any habits.
Yeah, absolutely. So well said. It's a complex thing, but that's why we are here every Sunday, because it's not easy. It takes a lot of conversations and inspiring people from different angles, telling the stories that inspired us to make the changes as well, and hopefully also inspiring our colleagues and healthcare professionals. So when you do come to that crucial point, then we are there with the knowledge, with the right knowledge to support you, not just to help you symptomatically treat with a pill or a surgery, which are great when we need it at the time of emergency. But then we can add another layer where we actually support you with the lifestyle changes that is optimally prescribed for what you want to achieve, with the current evidence that is not industry funded, that has nothing to do with fat diets and fat lifestyles. And we have the not only the ability to prescribe these things, but also to have from our point of view, have the time to actually structure that consultation in a way that we can get the information to you. And that's another reason why Afternoon Tea is here, is because we unfortunately, whilst the NHS is fantastic, it's a free service that is really high in information, it doesn't allow us the time that we need to help our patients, to inspire them to make that change. And also there's a lot of private companies and coaches that can have that support, but again, that's not accessible to everyone. So that's why we are here on Afternoon Tea, is to try to gain this time that we need to be able to bring that information that our patients need to make those changes, because it's not easy. But once again, Graham, you have brought that example that it doesn't have to be hard and you don't have to starve yourself. It can be fun and colorful and tasty. And that's why it was so sustainable. And that's why you're so passionate about it, because it's a positive force in your life, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's our life revolves around it now. I mean, it's made us want to do what we do in terms of a business. And I was working in the corporate environment for years in publishing and earning a like pretty high amount of money, and decided to wave goodbye to that and to do something that was more aligned with what I think is my purpose now. And that is, we're starting up this business because we believe passionately in what we do, and we want to help to inspire others as well in their own journeys.
Fantastic. We just wanted to let you know about Graham's website again, henryeu.com, which we have put on the chat, and we'll send it forward so you can learn more about their story. We will have Annette next month, where we will be covering women's health and how to reverse endometriosis and help with fertility on a whole food plant-based diet and with lifestyle.